The champagne glass slipped from my hand, shattering against the marble floor of the Riverside Country Club as laughter erupted around me. I stood frozen in my dress blue uniform, the same uniform I'd worn with pride through 3 combat deployments, now feeling like a costume that had somehow offended everyone in the room. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. "Oh my God, look at all those ribbons," sneered Jessica, my sister Emma's college roommate, her voice dripping with mock admiration. "What are those for? Perfect attendance? Good behavior?" The circle of wedding guests around her burst into fresh peals of laughter, their designer cocktail dresses and tailored suits making my military formal wear seem like something from a costume shop. My sister Emma, radiant in her flowing white gown, was across the room cutting the cake with her new husband, completely unaware of the humiliation unfolding just 20 feet away. The reception was everything she'd dreamed of: elegant, sophisticated, attended by the city's social elite. And here I was, her older brother Marcus, apparently the evening's entertainment. "Seriously, though," continued Bradley, the investment banker who'd been Emma's maid of honor's date, swirling his whiskey with practiced arrogance, "who wears a military uniform to a black tie wedding? It's like showing up to the opera in work clothes." He adjusted his expensive bow tie with the kind of smugness that comes from never having earned anything more challenging than a quarterly bonus. The group around them had grown larger, drawn by the spectacle of mocking the soldier. I recognized most of them. Emma's new social circle from her marketing job downtown. People who measured worth in stock portfolios and vacation homes in the Hamptons. To them, I was just the blue-collar brother who'd chosen the military instead of college. Someone who clearly didn't understand the social graces of their refined world. "I heard he's been deployed to some desert somewhere," whispered Caroline, loud enough for me to hear every word. "Probably hasn't seen civilization in years." That would explain the fashion choice. Her comment drew knowing nods and barely concealed smirks from the others. What they didn't know, what Emma herself didn't fully understand, was that this uniform represented 8 years of service, 3 Bronze Stars, and sacrifices that had cost me more than these people could imagine. The ribbons they were mocking told the story of Kandahar province, where I'd led a medical evacuation unit through hostile territory to save wounded civilians. The insignia they found so amusing marked my role in Operation Desert Shield, where my tactical decisions had prevented an international incident. But standing there surrounded by their casual cruelty, I felt none of that pride. I felt like a fraud, an outsider who'd somehow wandered into the wrong party. "Marcus!" The voice cut through the laughter like a blade. I turned to see General Harrison approaching, Emma's new father-in-law, the man I'd been dreading to meet all evening. At 62, he carried himself with the rigid posture of someone accustomed to absolute authority. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his black tuxedo impeccable, and his pale blue eyes held the kind of intensity that made subordinates straighten their spines automatically. The laughter died instantly. Even these privileged socialites recognized power when it entered the room, and General Harrison commanded respect wherever he went. He was a legend in military circles, a strategic mastermind who'd shaped modern warfare doctrine, and now he was walking directly toward me with an expression I couldn't read. My heart hammered against my chest. Emma had mentioned that her new father-in-law was something important in the military, but she'd never specified exactly what. I'd assumed he was a retired desk officer, someone who'd climbed the ranks through politics rather than combat. Looking at him now, I realized how wrong I'd been. "Excuse me," he said to the circle of guests, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd never needed to raise it to be heard. "I need to speak with this young man." The group scattered like leaves in the wind, suddenly finding urgent reasons to refresh their drinks or check their phones. I straightened to attention instinctively, my military training overriding my embarrassment. "Good evening, sir." General Harrison's eyes moved slowly across my uniform, taking in every detail, the ribbons, the insignia, the unit patches. His expression remained unreadable, but I saw something flicker in his gaze when he noticed the Special Operations tab above my left breast pocket. "Sergeant," he said finally, and the single word carried weight I couldn't interpret. Around us, The wedding reception continued. Music playing, guests dancing, the clink of silverware against china. But I felt as though we existed in a bubble of tense silence. "Yes, sir." He stepped closer, close enough that only I could hear his next words. "Walk with me." It wasn't a request. I followed him away from the reception area, through French doors that led to a private balcony overlooking the country club's golf course. The spring evening air was cool against my face, a relief after the stifling atmosphere inside. For a long moment we stood in silence, the distant sound of laughter and music drifting through the glass doors behind us. The general's hands were clasped behind his back as he stared out at the darkening landscape, and I found myself studying his profile, trying to understand what was happening. "Tell me about Kandahar," he said suddenly. The words hit me like a physical blow. Kandahar wasn't something I talked about, especially not at wedding receptions. It was classified, compartmentalized, buried in files that most people would never see. How did he know? "Sir, I'm not sure Operation Midnight Recovery," he continued, his voice still conversational, but with an edge that suggested he knew exactly what he was talking about. March 15th, 2019. A medical evacuation convoy trapped behind enemy lines. 47 wounded civilians, including children. Standard protocol would have called for air support and a full military extraction. My mouth went dry. Those details weren't in any public record. They were known only to a handful of people in the Pentagon, commanders who'd been briefed on the mission's classified aspects. The general turned to face me directly, and I saw something in his eyes that made my chest tighten. "But air support wasn't available, was it, Sergeant? Equipment malfunction grounded the helicopters. So someone made a decision to go in anyway, against direct orders, risking court-martial to save those lives." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Someone led a 12-man team through 15 miles of hostile territory, established a defensive perimeter, and held it for 6 hours until backup arrived." The balcony seemed to spin around me. This was impossible. That mission was so classified that even Emma didn't know the details. I'd told her I'd been involved in a medical evacuation, nothing more. The specifics were locked away in files that required security clearances most generals didn't possess. "How do you?" "Because," General Harrison said, stepping closer until we were almost nose to nose, "I wrote the commendation that should have earned you the Distinguished Service Cross. I signed the recommendation that should have made you a decorated hero instead of a sergeant wearing ribbons that nobody understands." The world tilted. Through the glass doors, I could see the wedding reception continuing in blissful ignorance. My sister dancing with her new husband, guests raising toasts, the same people who'd been mocking my uniform just minutes earlier now celebrating without a care in the world. But out here on this balcony, everything had changed. The general who was now my sister's father-in-law wasn't just any retired officer. He was the man who'd fought for my recognition, who'd tried to ensure that Operation Midnight Recovery received the acknowledgement it deserved. The man who knew that the ribbons Jessica had mocked represented actions that had saved 47 lives. "The Pentagon buried it," he continued, his voice heavy with old frustration. "Too politically sensitive. Couldn't officially recognize a mission that violated direct orders, even one that succeeded beyond all expectations. So your team got standard commendations while the real story disappeared into classified files." Inside, someone had started a speech. Through the glass, I could see Emma's new husband raising his champagne glass, probably thanking everyone for celebrating their special day. The contrast was surreal. The surface celebration of a perfect wedding, while out here, secrets that had shaped my entire military career were finally being acknowledged. "Sir, I don't understand why you're telling me this." General Harrison smiled for the first time since approaching me, but it was a sad smile, tinged with something that looked like regret. "Because, Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez, in about 30 seconds, I'm going to walk back into that reception and have a conversation with those people who thought it was amusing to mock your service. And I wanted you to understand why." Before I could respond, he turned and strode back toward the French doors, leaving me alone on the balcony with questions spinning through my mind like debris in a tornado. Through the glass, I watched him approach the microphone where Emma's husband had just finished his toast. "Ladies and gentlemen," His voice boomed across the reception hall, cutting through conversations and forcing everyone to pay attention. "If I may have just a moment of your time." 18 years earlier, the sound of breaking glass echoed through our cramped apartment in East Cleveland as another bottle shattered against the kitchen wall. I pressed my back against my bedroom door, Emma's small hand gripping mine so tightly her fingernails left marks on my palm. She was only 7, trembling in her faded Barbie pajamas as our father's voice roared through the thin walls. "Where's the money, Linda? I know you're hiding it somewhere." Mom's voice came back quieter, defeated. "Tony, please, the kids are sleeping." "The kids! The kids! Always the damn kids!" Another crash. This time, what sounded like a chair hitting the floor. "I need that money tonight, or Vinny's guys are gonna." Emma whimpered, and I pulled her closer, my 12-year-old mind racing through options I was too young to have. Our father's gambling addiction had been spiraling for months, turning our home into a war zone where breakfast money disappeared into poker games and rent payments vanished at the racetrack. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. "Marcus," Emma whispered, her voice so small I had to lean down to hear her. "Are they going to hurt Mommy?" Before I could answer, our bedroom door flew open. Dad stood silhouetted in the doorway, his face flushed with alcohol and rage, his Cleveland Browns jersey torn at the collar. Behind him, I could see Mom hovering in the hallway, her left eye already beginning to swell. "You kids got any money? Birthday money? Christmas money? Anything?" His words slurred together as he scanned our sparse room. Bunk beds Dad had built from scrap wood, a shared dresser with mismatched handles, walls decorated with Emma's crayon drawings of stick figure families that looked nothing like ours. "Dad, we don't have—" "Don't lie to me, Marcus." He lunged forward, grabbing my shoulders and shaking me hard enough to make my teeth rattle. "I know your grandmother slips you cash sometimes. Where is it?" Emma started crying, the kind of silent tears that broke my heart because she'd learned that making noise only made things worse. Our father's attention shifted to her, and something cold settled in my stomach. "What about you, sweetheart? Got any money hidden away?" The way he said sweetheart made my skin crawl. I'd seen that look before, the calculation behind his bloodshot eyes as he weighed how much pressure he could apply to a 7-year-old girl. "Leave her alone." The words came out of my mouth before I could stop them. Dad's head snapped toward me, his grip on my shoulders tightening, until I felt bruises forming. "What did you say to me, boy?" I said, "Leave her alone." My voice shook, but I held his stare. "She's just a kid." What happened next changed everything. Dad's hand connected with my cheek so hard that stars exploded across my vision. But instead of backing down, something inside me snapped. For months I'd watched him terrorize Mom, listened to Emma cry herself to sleep, felt the constant fear that poisoned every moment in our house. I didn't plan what came next. My body moved before my brain caught up, muscle memory from years of playground fights taking over. My fist caught him in the solar plexus, and for just a moment, the shock on his face almost made me laugh. Then his expression twisted into something truly dangerous. "You little—" "Tony, stop!" Mom's scream cut through the air as she threw herself between us. "He's just a child!" The next few minutes blurred together in a chaos of shouting, Mom pushing Dad toward the front door, Emma sobbing behind me, and the sick realization that I'd just crossed a line I could never uncross. When the apartment finally fell silent, the three of us sat on the couch in our living room, staring at the front door Dad had slammed behind him. "He's not coming back tonight," Mom said quietly, dabbing at her swollen eye with a dish towel. "Maybe not tomorrow either." But we all knew he would come back eventually. He always did. "Mom," I said, my voice hoarse from holding back tears, "we can't keep living like this." She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something break behind her eyes. "Marcus, baby, I don't know what else to do. I can't work more hours than I already am, and without your father's job." "What job? He got fired 3 weeks ago and hasn't told you." The silence that followed was deafening. Emma had stopped crying and was staring at both of us with the wide-eyed expression of a child trying to understand an adult world that made no sense. "How do you know that?" Mom whispered. Because I saw him at Tony's bar yesterday when I was walking home from school. He was there at 2 in the afternoon, telling anyone who'd listen about how his supervisor had it out for him. I took a shaky breath. Mom, he's been pretending to go to work for weeks. That night, after we'd moved Emma's mattress into Mom's room and barricaded the front door with our kitchen table, Mom sat me down for the conversation that would reshape my entire future. Marcus, I need you to understand something. Your father, he wasn't always like this. When I met him, he was funny and kind, and he had dreams. Big dreams about owning his own auto shop, maybe coaching a little league. She twisted her wedding ring, a thin gold band that had lost its shine years ago. But sometimes people get lost, baby. Sometimes the dreams get too heavy to carry. What are you saying? I'm saying that you have a choice to make. You can let this house, this situation, define who you become. Or you can decide that you're going to be different. She reached over and touched my cheek where Dad's handprint was still visible. But if you choose to be different, it's going to be hard. Harder than anything you can imagine. Quote, 3 days later, Dad came home with flowers and apologies. The same cycle we'd lived through dozens of times. But something had changed in me during those 3 days. I'd seen what our life looked like without his chaos, how Emma laughed more freely, how Mom hummed while she cooked dinner. I'd also done something I'd never done before. I'd gone to the public library and researched our options. Mom, I said that evening while Dad was passed out on the couch, I want to talk to you about military school. The conversation that followed lasted until dawn. Mom cried. I cried. Emma, who'd been eavesdropping from the hallway, cried. But by morning, we'd made a decision that would split our family apart to save what was left of it. The nearest military academy was 3 hours away in Columbus. It offered full scholarships for families demonstrating financial need, along with a structured environment designed to turn troubled kids into disciplined young men. The application process was brutal. Essays, interviews, medical exams, psychological evaluations. But for a 12-year-old who'd been living in a war zone, the idea of rules and order and predictable consequences felt like salvation. The hardest part wasn't the academic requirements or the physical fitness tests. It was the night before I left, sitting on Emma's bed as she cried into my shoulder. I don't want you to go, Marcus. What if Dad gets worse? What if he hurts Mom? Em, listen to me. I tilted her chin up so she had to look at me. I'm not abandoning you. I'm going to learn how to protect you better. In 4 years, I'll graduate, and then I'll come back stronger. Strong enough to make sure Dad never hurts anyone again. Promise? I promise. Looking back, I'm not sure either of us believed it at the time. But sometimes promises aren't about certainty. They're about hope, and hope was all we had left. The day I walked through the gates of Columbus Military Academy, carrying everything I owned in a duffel bag Mom had bought at a yard sale, I was angry. Angry at Dad for destroying our family. Angry at Mom for not leaving sooner. Angry at the world for dealing us such a losing hand. What I didn't realize was that anger, properly channeled, could become purpose. And purpose, in the hands of a determined kid from East Cleveland, could reshape everything. Columbus Military Academy transformed me in ways I never expected. The boy who arrived with anger burning in his chest gradually became someone else. Disciplined, focused, driven by something deeper than rage. But the real test of who I'd become didn't happen on the parade grounds or in the classroom. It happened during my senior year, when a single phone call shattered the carefully constructed world I'd built. Marcus? Emma's voice was barely a whisper through the static of the payphone. It was 2:30 a.m., and cadets weren't supposed to receive calls after lights out, but Sergeant Morrison had made an exception when he heard the desperation in the caller's voice. What's wrong? I pressed the phone closer to my ear, my heart already hammering as I recognized the tremor in her voice, the same fear I remembered from our childhood. It's Mom. She's in the hospital. The words came out in a rush, punctuated by muffled sobs. Dad came home 3 days ago, drunk and angry about some poker game. He said he needed money for his debts, and when Mom told him we didn't have any, I didn't need her to finish. I could picture it perfectly. Dad's fists, Mom's broken ribs, the The familiar cycle of violence that had driven me away 4 years earlier. My free hand clenched so tightly around the phone cord that my knuckles went white. How bad? Concussion, 3 broken ribs. Her left arm is... Marcus, the doctors say she can't go back to that apartment, not alone, not with him still around. The words hit me like a physical blow. In 2 months, I was supposed to graduate as valedictorian of my class. West Point had already accepted me with a full scholarship. Not just any appointment, but a direct presidential nomination based on my academic record and leadership scores. 4 years, at the most prestigious military academy in the country, followed by a guaranteed commission as an officer in the United States Army. It was everything I'd dreamed of since arriving at Columbus. More than that, it was my ticket to a life where I'd never have to worry about money or violence or watching the people I loved get hurt by someone stronger and meaner. The golden path stretched out before me, clear and certain and mine for the taking. "Where are you staying?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "With Mrs. Patterson next door. But Marcus, she's got 5 kids of her own, and her husband's been out of work for 3 months. We can't stay here long." I closed my eyes and saw my future crumbling like sand through my fingers. West Point didn't hold appointments indefinitely. If I deferred, there was no guarantee they'd take me the following year. More likely, my slot would go to the next candidate on the waiting list, and I'd spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been. "Marcus, are you still there?" "Yeah, Em, I'm here." I opened my eyes and stared at the recruitment posters lining the hallway. Soldiers in dress blues. Officers leading men into battle. The promise of honor and glory and respect. "Listen, I'm going to figure something out, okay? Give me 48 hours. What followed were the longest 2 days of my life. I sat through classes without hearing a word, stared at textbooks without reading, went through the motions of military routine while my mind raced through impossible calculations. Mom's medical bills would be astronomical. Even with insurance from her part-time job at the grocery store, the deductibles and co-pays would drain what little savings she had. Emma was only 15, still in high school, dependent on Mom for everything. Meanwhile, Dad had disappeared again, probably hiding out with one of his gambling buddies until the heat died down. He'd done it before. Vanish for weeks or months, then return with promises and excuses, just long enough to destroy whatever stability Mom had managed to build in his absence. On the second night, I called my academic advisor, Colonel Peters. He was a decorated Vietnam veteran who'd taken a special interest in my case, partly because he'd grown up poor himself and understood the weight of the opportunity I'd been given. "Son, I'm going to be straight with you," he said after I'd explained the situation. "If you turn down West Point now, you'll probably never get another chance like this. The Army has other programs, sure, but nothing that opens the same doors. You're talking about sacrificing a career that could make you a general someday." "I understand that, sir." "Do you? Because I've seen a lot of young men make emotional decisions they regret for the rest of their lives. Your mother wouldn't want you to throw away your future for her sake." He was right, of course. Mom had sacrificed everything to get me to this point, working double shifts, going without so I could have uniforms and textbooks, crying herself to sleep when she thought I couldn't hear because she missed me so much. The last thing she'd want was for me to give up my dreams to take care of her. But that was exactly what made the choice so clear. The next morning, I walked into the administrative office and requested the forms to decline my West Point appointment. The secretary, a kind woman named Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd processed hundreds of military academy applications over the years, looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Cadet Rodriguez, are you absolutely certain about this? Perhaps you should speak with the chaplain, or take a few more days to think." "I'm certain, ma'am." She studied my face for a long moment, probably looking for signs of a nervous breakdown or temporary insanity. What she saw instead was the same expression I'd worn 4 years earlier when I decided to leave home: grim determination mixed with absolute clarity about what needed to be done. "What will you do instead?" That was the question I'd been wrestling with for 2 days. I had excellent grades and test scores, along with 4 years of military training that most college applicants couldn't match. I could probably get into a decent state school, maybe even with some scholarship money. But college took time and money I didn't have, and Mom needed help immediately. I'm going to enlist, I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth. Active duty, straight out of high school. Mrs. Rodriguez's eyes widened. Cadet, you realize that's going backwards. You have the qualifications to be an officer. Enlisting as a private means starting at the bottom, working your way up through the ranks over years or decades. I'd run those numbers too. An enlisted soldier's starting salary was barely enough to support one person, let alone help with Mom's medical bills and Emma's living expenses. But there were signing bonuses for certain specialties, and accelerated programs for soldiers with strong academic records. It wasn't the golden path I'd been walking, but it was a path nonetheless. Sometimes starting at the bottom is the only way to make sure the people you love don't fall through the cracks, I told her. That afternoon, I called the local Army recruitment station in Cleveland and spoke with Staff Sergeant Williams, a career soldier who'd heard every sob story and desperate plea in the book. But something in my voice must have convinced him I was serious, because he spent an hour walking me through specialty programs and educational benefits. Kid, I'm not going to lie to you. What you're describing, supporting a family on an E1 salary while trying to advance your own career, it's going to be brutal. Most guys who try it either burn out or go into debt so deep they never recover. What about the ones who don't burn out? A pause. The ones who make it through usually become the kind of leaders other soldiers would follow into hell. But the price they pay, he sighed. Well, let's just say it takes a special kind of person to sacrifice their own dreams for someone else's survival. The irony wasn't lost on me. 4 years earlier, I'd left home to escape a cycle of violence and poverty. Now I was choosing to step directly back into it, not as a victim this time, but as someone with the training and discipline to break it permanently. 2 weeks later, I stood in the parking lot of Columbus Military Academy, my dress uniform pressed and perfect, watching my classmates board buses that would take them to West Point, Naval Academy, Air Force Academy, all the prestigious institutions that represented the pinnacle of military education. Their families surrounded them with cameras and congratulations, celebrating the achievement of a lifetime. My own celebration was quieter. Mom had been released from the hospital the day before, her left arm still in a cast, moving carefully to protect her healing ribs. Emma stood beside her, 17 now and taller than I remembered, but still small enough that my dress jacket dwarfed her when I wrapped it around her shoulders. I'm proud of you, Mom whispered as she hugged me goodbye, and I knew she meant it. Not because I was enlisting instead of becoming an officer, but because I was choosing family over ambition, love over glory. Take care of each other, I told them, though I knew the taking care would flow in the opposite direction now. My Army salary would cover rent on a decent apartment, medical bills, groceries. Emma could focus on school instead of working part-time jobs. Mom could heal without worrying about Dad's next violent episode. As my bus pulled away from the academy, I watched my former classmates through the window, laughing and planning their bright futures. I felt no bitterness, no regret. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that sometimes the most courageous choice isn't the one that leads to glory. It's the one that ensures the people you love have a chance to find their own. Fort Benning, Georgia in July felt like stepping into a furnace. The humidity hung thick as molasses, and the red clay dust seemed to coat everything within minutes of stepping outside. I stood in formation with 49 other new recruits, sweat already soaking through my fatigues despite the early morning hour, listening to Drill Sergeant Jackson explain exactly how worthless we all were. You maggots think you know what hard work is? He screamed, his face inches from mine. You think because you played high school football or worked at McDonald's, you're ready for the United States Army? Well, let me educate you. What followed were 16 weeks of the most brutal physical and mental conditioning I'd ever experienced, and I loved every minute of it. While my former classmates were attending orientation sessions at West Point, learning about honor codes and leadership principles in air-conditioned lecture halls, I was crawling through obstacle courses at 4 a.m. and memorizing field manuals by flashlight. The other recruits complained constantly about the heat, the exhaustion, the drill sergeants who seemed to take personal pleasure in making our lives miserable. But for me, it felt like coming home. The structure, the discipline, the clear expectations, After years of chaos in my childhood home, the military's rigid order was exactly what I'd been searching for. More importantly, I was good at it. The physical training that left other recruits gasping and stumbling came naturally to someone who'd been conditioning himself since age 12. The weapons training, tactical exercises, and leadership challenges tapped into skills I'd developed at Columbus Military Academy. By week 8, I'd been promoted to squad leader, responsible for 9 other recruits who looked to me for guidance and motivation. By week 12, the drill sergeants were using me as an example of what right looked like. By graduation, I'd scored in the top 2% of my class and earned recommendations for advanced training programs. Rodriguez, Drill Sergeant Jackson, called me aside on graduation day, his usual scowl replaced by something that might have been approved. "You've got options here. Airborne School, Ranger Training, Special Forces Assessment. With your scores and leadership ratings, you could write your own ticket." The temptation was enormous. Special operations meant better pay, more responsibility, faster promotions. It also meant longer deployments, higher risk, and months away from Mom and Emma when they still needed my support. I'd been sending most of my paycheck home for 4 months, and it was finally making a difference. Mom had been able to quit her second job and focus on physical therapy for her injuries, while Emma was thriving in her senior year without the constant stress of financial worry. "I appreciate the offer, Sergeant, but I'm thinking about something more stable, at least for the first few years." He studied my face, probably seeing the same calculation I'd been wrestling with for weeks. "Family? Family. Fair enough. But Rodriguez, don't sell yourself short. I've been training soldiers for 15 years, and you've got something special. Whatever path you choose, you're going to make your mark." My first assignment was Fort Hood, Texas, with the 1st Cavalry Division. As a newly minted private first class, I found myself in the Medical Support Battalion, driving ambulances and learning emergency field medicine. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills and gave me valuable skills while keeping me stateside. The hardest part wasn't the physical demands or the military discipline. It was watching other soldiers my age advance faster because they didn't have financial obligations pulling at them. While I was sending $800 of my $1,200 monthly salary home to Cleveland, they were investing in college courses, language training, and specialized certifications that would accelerate their careers. "Rodriguez, you're being stupid," said Specialist Tyler Morrison, my bunkmate and closest friend in the unit. Tyler was from Connecticut, the son of a successful lawyer who joined the Army for adventure rather than necessity. "You could be taking night classes toward your degree, maybe applying for officer candidate school. Instead, you're basically working as a glorified taxi driver." He wasn't wrong. Driving medical transport vehicles around Fort Hood wasn't exactly utilizing my leadership potential or intellectual capabilities. But every time I considered shifting my focus toward advancement, I'd get a call from home that reminded me why I'd made my choice. "Marcus, Emma made honor roll again," Mom would report, her voice bright with pride and relief. "She's been talking about college applications. Can you believe it? College. Your sister's going to be the first Rodriguez to get a degree." Those calls made every sacrifice worthwhile. The turning point came during my second year at Fort Hood, when our battalion received orders for deployment to Afghanistan. The Taliban had been increasing attacks on medical convoys, and the Army needed experienced drivers who could handle both vehicle operations and basic combat medicine. My combination of perfect safety records and high fitness scores made me an obvious choice for the deployment roster. 12 months in Kandahar province, Captain Martinez explained during our briefing. "You'll be running medical supplies between forward operating bases and providing emergency evacuation for wounded personnel. It's dangerous work, but it's also where careers are made." The deployment pay would more than double my income, which meant I could finally start building a real savings account while still supporting Mom and Emma. More importantly, combat experience would open doors that had been closed to me as a support soldier. Leadership opportunities, specialized training, accelerated promotions. Everything I'd been putting on hold would suddenly become possible. But it also meant a year away from home when Emma was starting her senior year of high school, navigating college applications and scholarship deadlines. Mom was stronger now, but she still had nightmares about Dad and panic attacks when she heard unexpected noises. They needed stability, not another family member disappearing into danger. The night before we deployed, I called home from the USO Center at Dallas Airport. Emma answered on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting by the phone. "Are you scared?" she asked without preamble. The honest answer was yes. Not of the physical danger. My training had prepared me for that. But I was terrified of failing the people counting on me, both my family back home and my fellow soldiers who would depend on my skills in life-or-death situations. A little, I admitted, but scared in a good way, like before a big game. "Promise me you'll be careful?" "I promise I'll be smart. And Em?" "I promise I'll come home." Afghanistan was everything the briefings had warned us about, and worse. The heat was oppressive, the terrain unforgiving, and the constant threat of improvised explosive devices turned every convoy run into a high-stakes chess match. Within my first month, I'd survived 2 IED attacks and a rocket-propelled grenade strike that destroyed the vehicle in front of mine. But I also discovered something about myself that I'd never known. Under pressure, when lives hung in the balance and split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death, I didn't just survive, I excelled. The chaos that sent other soldiers into panic sharpened my focus. The responsibility that overwhelmed some people energized me. 6 months into deployment, I was promoted to sergeant and given command of my own medical transport team. 8 months in, I received my first commendation for successfully evacuating wounded civilians under enemy fire. By month 10, I was being consulted on convoy security protocols and tactical planning, responsibilities typically reserved for career officers. Rodriguez, Lieutenant Colonel Stevens, called me into his office after a particularly successful mission. "I'm recommending you for the Bronze Star, but more than that, I want to talk to you about your future in this man's army." The conversation that followed changed everything. Stevens had reviewed my academic records from Columbus Military Academy, my performance evaluations, and my leadership assessments. He saw potential that went far beyond driving ambulances and treating wounded soldiers. "You could apply for officer candidate school when this deployment ends," he said. "With my recommendation and your combat record, you'd be virtually guaranteed acceptance. 3 months of training and you'd come out as a second lieutenant." It was everything I'd given up 4 years earlier, finally within reach. But the timing was terrible. Emma was starting college in the fall, and Mom was still rebuilding her life. Taking time away for officer training, even with the promise of better long-term career prospects, would mean months without my financial support at the exact moment they needed it most. "Sir, I'm honored by the recommendation, but..." "Let me finish, Sergeant. There's another option. The Army has a program for exceptional non-commissioned officers. Accelerated promotion track, specialized training, leadership roles typically reserved for lieutenants and captains. It's not the traditional officer path, but for someone with your background and demonstrated abilities, it could be even better." He slid a folder across his desk. Inside were details about advanced medical training programs, tactical leadership courses, and specialized operations that would utilize everything I'd learned about emergency medicine and crisis management. The pay grades were impressive. Faster promotion to staff sergeant, then sergeant first class, potentially master sergeant within 5 years. Think about it, Rodriguez. You've already proven you can lead under fire. This program would give you the formal training and authority to match your natural abilities. That night, I sat in my bunk reading through the program details while rockets whistled overhead and generators hummed in the background. Around me, other soldiers played cards, wrote letters home, or tried to catch a few hours of sleep before the next mission. I thought about Emma, probably staying up late in her dorm room studying for finals. I thought about Mom, finally sleeping peacefully in her own apartment without fear. And I thought about the boy who'd left Cleveland 8 years earlier, angry and desperate, and convinced that the only way to save his family was to sacrifice everything he wanted for himself. Maybe sacrifice wasn't the right word anymore. Maybe what I'd thought was giving up my dreams had actually been the first step toward finding better ones. The French doors swung open behind me, and I turned to see General Harrison striding back into the reception hall with the measured pace of someone about to deliver a verdict. The conversations throughout the room gradually died as guests noticed his commanding presence at the microphone. My sister Emma paused mid-laugh at something her new husband had whispered, her face lighting up with the expectation of another heartfelt toast. "Ladies and gentlemen," General Harrison's voice carried across the Riverside Country Club's reception hall with military precision, I apologize for interrupting your evening, but something has been brought to my attention that requires immediate clarification. I remained frozen on the balcony, watching through the glass as the scene unfolded. Jessica, Bradley, and their circle of friends had clustered near the bar, their earlier mockery replaced by nervous curiosity. They had no idea what was coming. Earlier this evening, I witnessed some guests expressing opinions about military service and those who choose to wear the uniform. His pale blue eyes swept across the room, settling briefly on each member of the group that had humiliated me. I believe there may be some misconceptions that need addressing. Emma's face had gone pale. She knew that tone, the same careful, diplomatic voice our father had used when delivering difficult news to patients' families. Something was wrong, but she couldn't yet see what. Bradley, emboldened by champagne and his earlier success at entertaining the crowd, stepped forward slightly. "General, sir, I hope we haven't offended. We were just having a little fun with Emma's brother. You know how it is with military folks. They take themselves so seriously." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. General Harrison's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted, like a predator recognizing prey. "Fun," he repeated, his voice carrying just enough edge to make smart people uncomfortable. "Please, tell me more about this fun you were having." "Well, Bradley glanced around at his friends for support, suddenly less confident. "The guy shows up to a black tie wedding in military dress blues. It's a bit much, don't you think? Like he's trying to be the center of attention or something." "I see. And this opinion is based on your extensive knowledge of military protocol?" "I'm just saying, there's a time and place for everything. This is a wedding, not a parade." General Harrison nodded slowly, as if considering Bradley's words carefully. "You're absolutely right. There is a time and place for everything. For instance, there's a time and place for respecting those who've served their country, and there's a time and place for civilians to speak about matters they don't understand." The rebuke was delivered so smoothly that it took Bradley a moment to realize he'd been insulted. When it hit him, his face flushed red. "Now wait just a minute." "No, you wait." The general's voice didn't rise, but it carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Since you seem so interested in military uniforms and their appropriateness, perhaps you'd like to know exactly what those ribbons and insignia represent." He gestured toward the balcony where I stood, and every eye in the room followed his hand. I felt exposed, pinned like a specimen under a microscope, but something in his expression told me to stay exactly where I was. "That uniform belongs to Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez, and those ribbons you found so amusing tell a story I think you should hear." General Harrison turned to address the entire room, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of someone who'd briefed presidents and generals. "The Bronze Star with V device for valor, awarded for actions under enemy fire that saved the lives of 47 civilians, including children, during a medical evacuation in Kandahar province." The room was dead silent now. Emma's hand had gone to her throat, her eyes wide with shock. She'd known I'd received commendations during my deployment, but I'd never told her the details. "The Combat Medical Badge," the general continued, "earned by providing medical aid under direct enemy fire on at least 15 separate occasions. The Army Commendation Medal with 4 oak leaf clusters, representing multiple acts of heroism and exceptional service." Bradley's face had gone from red to ashen. Jessica was staring at her shoes, apparently fascinated by her designer heels. The other members of their group had begun to edge away, as if mockery might be contagious and they didn't want to be associated with it. "But perhaps," General Harrison said, his voice taking on a tone that made my blood run cold, "you'd like to hear about March 15th, 2019. Operation Midnight Recovery." My heart stopped. That operation was classified at the highest levels. The fact that he was about to discuss it publicly meant either he'd lost his mind or he was operating under authority I couldn't imagine. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was leading a medical convoy through the Kandahar Valley when they received an emergency call. A civilian bus had been attacked by Taliban forces and was stranded in hostile territory. 47 wounded passengers, including 12 children under the age of 10. General Harrison paused, letting the weight of those numbers settle over the room. Standard protocol called for air evacuation. But mechanical failures had grounded all available helicopters. Command made the decision to wait for backup, estimated arrival time 6 hours. He looked directly at Bradley, who was now visibly sweating despite the air conditioning. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez made a different decision. Against direct orders, he led his team into enemy territory to establish a medical aid station and defensive perimeter around the stranded civilians. Emma's eyes were locked on me through the glass, tears streaming down her face. She was seeing her brother in a completely different light, understanding for the first time the reality of what I'd experienced overseas. For 6 hours, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez and his team held that position under constant enemy fire. They treated wounds, performed emergency surgery with battlefield medical kits, and kept 47 people alive until reinforcements could arrive. General Harrison's voice grew harder. When backup finally reached their position, they found 12 American soldiers who had faced down over 100 Taliban fighters. 0 civilian casualties. 0 American casualties. The silence in the room was deafening. These people, who'd spent their evening celebrating wealth and social status, were suddenly confronted with a type of courage and sacrifice they couldn't comprehend. The official report was classified due to the political sensitivity of violating direct orders, even orders violated for humanitarian reasons. General Harrison's eyes swept across the group that had mocked my uniform. But I can tell you this. That young man on the balcony saved more lives in a single day than most people save in a lifetime. Bradley tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Finally, he managed to stammer out, We didn't know. Of course you didn't know, General Harrison replied, his voice cutting through Bradley's pathetic attempt at an apology. Because you've never bothered to learn? You see a uniform and you see a costume. You see ribbons and you see decorations. You have no idea what they actually mean because you've never been willing to make the sacrifices required to earn them. He stepped closer to Bradley, close enough that the younger man instinctively backed away. Let me educate you about something, son. That uniform represents 8 years of service to something bigger than yourself. Those ribbons represent moments when a young man from Cleveland chose to risk his life for strangers he'd never met. That man you mocked gave up a full scholarship to West Point. Yes, West Point. To take care of his family. He chose duty over glory, service over self-interest. The general's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but somehow it carried to every corner of the room. And you, in your $1,000 tuxedo and your inherited privilege, thought it would be amusing to mock him for wearing his dress uniform to his sister's wedding. Quote, Emma had broken away from her husband and was walking toward the balcony doors, her wedding dress trailing behind her. But General Harrison held up a hand, stopping her. I'm not finished, he said, his attention returning to the group that had tormented me. You see, there's something else you should know about Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. Something that makes your behavior tonight particularly ironic. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an official-looking document. This morning, I received confirmation of a promotion recommendation I submitted 6 months ago. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez has been selected for advancement to Sergeant First Class, with assignment to the Pentagon's Special Operations Medical Division. My knees nearly buckled. Assignment to the Pentagon was career-defining, the kind of opportunity that came along once in a lifetime. It meant working directly with military leadership, influencing policy, shaping the future of combat medicine. Furthermore, General Harrison continued, he's been accepted into the Army's Accelerated Officer Program. In 18 months, he'll graduate as a captain, with a specialty in tactical emergency medicine. The room erupted in whispers and murmurs. These people, who'd built their identities around status and achievement, were suddenly realizing they'd been mocking someone whose accomplishments dwarfed anything they'd ever done. But General Harrison wasn't finished delivering his verdict. He looked directly at Bradley, his expression cold enough to freeze water. You asked if there was a time and place for everything, young man. Well, this is the time and place for you to understand exactly how small and petty you are. That man you ridiculed has dedicated his life to serving others. And you? What exactly have you contributed to the world besides your father's money and your own arrogance? The question hung in the air like a blade. Bradley's mouth worked soundlessly, but no answer came. How could it? What accomplishment could he possibly claim that would measure against saving 47 lives under enemy fire? General Harrison folded the document and returned it to his jacket. I think this conversation is over. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, would you please join us? My legs felt like rubber as I walked back into the reception hall. Every eye was on me, but the mockery and amusement were gone, replaced by something I'd never expected to see in this room. Respect. As I walked back into the reception hall, the silence was so complete I could hear the soft whisper of my dress shoes against the marble floor. Every face turned toward me carried a different expression. Shame, curiosity, newfound respect, or, in Emma's case, overwhelming pride mixed with tears she was no longer trying to hide. General Harrison extended his hand as I approached. Not the casual handshake of a wedding reception, but the firm, respectful grip shared between soldiers who understood each other's worth. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, his voice carrying the same authority that had just demolished Bradley's group. I'd like you to meet one of the finest soldiers I've had the privilege to know, Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez, recipient of the Bronze Star with V device, Combat Medical Badge, and more commendations for valor than most career officers accumulate in 20 years. The applause started slowly, uncertain as guests tried to process the complete reversal of their evening's entertainment, but it built steadily, spreading through the room like a wave, until even the catering staff had stopped their work to join in. Emma broke free from the crowd and ran toward me, her wedding dress trailing behind her like something from a fairy tale. Marcus, she whispered as she threw her arms around me. Why didn't you ever tell me? All these years I knew you'd served overseas, but I never knew. Her voice broke, and she pressed her face against my chest, probably not caring that she was crying on my dress blues. Because it wasn't about recognition, Em. It was about doing what needed to be done. Over her shoulder, I could see Bradley and his friends making their way toward the exit, their faces burning with shame and anger. Jessica paused at the door, looking back once with an expression that might have been regret, but they were gone before I could be sure. General Harrison approached us, his expression softer now that the confrontation was over. Sergeant Rodriguez, I owe you an apology. What those people said tonight was inexcusable, and I should have intervened sooner. No apology necessary, sir, but I do have a question. How did you know about Operation Midnight Recovery? That file was classified beyond most security clearances. He smiled, and for the first time that evening, it reached his eyes. Because I was the one who recommended you for the Bronze Star. And I was the one who fought with Pentagon bureaucrats for 6 months to get your team the recognition you deserved. His expression grew serious. I was also the one who made the decision to keep the operation classified, despite believing you and your team deserved public acknowledgement for your heroism. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Sir, I don't understand. You were involved in the command decision? I was regional commander for Afghan medical operations at the time. When word came down about a medical convoy that had violated direct orders to conduct an unauthorized rescue mission, my initial reaction was anger. Soldiers don't get to pick and choose which orders they follow, regardless of their intentions. He paused, glancing around the room where wedding guests were still processing what they'd witnessed. But then I read the after-action reports. 47 lives saved. 0 casualties among your team despite 6 hours under enemy fire. Tactical decisions that demonstrated judgment beyond your rank and experience. That's when I realized we weren't dealing with insubordination. We were dealing with leadership. Emma had stepped back slightly, still holding my hand but listening intently to every word. Around us, the reception had resumed, but with a different energy. Conversations were quieter, more thoughtful, as if the evening's events had forced everyone to reconsider their assumptions about value and worth. There's something else you should know, General Harrison continued. The Pentagon assignment I mentioned, it comes with a choice. You can accept the promotion and transfer to Washington, or you can take a different path. He reached into his jacket again, this time producing a thick envelope with official seals. The Army has approved your application for the Direct Commission Officer Program. If you accept, you'll be commissioned as a captain, with an assignment to Walter Reed Medical Center as Director of Emergency Combat Medicine Training. My head spun. Walter Reed was the premier military medical facility in the country, where the most advanced trauma medicine in the world was practiced and taught. Being offered a directorship, there wasn't just a promotion, it was recognition as one of the top medical professionals in the military. Sir, I never applied for direct commission. No, but I did. On your behalf, based on your service record, and the recommendations of every officer you've served under. He held out the envelope. The choice is yours, Marcus. Pentagon assignment as an enlisted soldier, or medical directorship as a commissioned officer. Either way, you'll be in Washington, close enough to visit your family regularly. Before I could respond, Emma squeezed my hand tighter. Marcus, Mom called me yesterday. She wanted me to tell you something, but I wasn't sure when to bring it up. What is it? She's getting married. To Officer Patterson. You remember him. From the police department? He's been helping her with Dad's harassment issues, and they've been dating for 8 months. Emma's smile was radiant. She's happy, Marcus. Really, genuinely happy. And she wanted you to know that you don't need to worry about taking care of her anymore. The words hit me with unexpected force. For 8 years, every decision I'd made had been filtered through the question of how it would affect Mom and Emma's security and well-being. The idea that I could make choices based purely on my own goals and ambitions felt foreign, almost frightening. There's more, Emma continued. I got the Fulbright Scholarship, full funding for graduate school in biochemistry at Johns Hopkins. I'll be in Baltimore, an hour from Washington. Her eyes sparkled with tears and joy. Marcus, for the first time in our lives, we can all pursue our dreams without worrying about survival. I looked at the envelope in General Harrison's hand, then at my sister's face, glowing with happiness and possibility. Around us, the wedding reception continued, but it felt transformed. What had begun as an evening of humiliation had become something else entirely, a celebration not just of Emma's marriage, but of the journey that had brought our family to this moment. General Harrison, I said, accepting the envelope with hands that trembled slightly, I'd be honored to accept the commission. The applause that erupted was different from the polite clapping earlier. This came from genuine emotion, from wedding guests who'd witnessed something they'd never forget, the moment when true heroism was finally recognized and rewarded. Emma's new husband, David, approached us with a champagne bottle and fresh glasses. I think this calls for a toast, he said, his voice warm with admiration. Marcus, I've been looking forward to having you as a brother-in-law, but I had no idea I was gaining a genuine American hero. Quote, as glasses were filled and raised throughout the room, General Harrison stepped forward one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to propose a toast to Captain Marcus Rodriguez, a man who understood from a young age that true strength isn't measured by what you can take, but by what you're willing to give. The toast that followed seemed to wash away every moment of humiliation and doubt I'd experienced that evening. But more than that, it marked the end of a chapter that had begun 8 years earlier with an angry, desperate teenager making impossible choices for his family's survival. As the celebration continued into the night, I found myself thinking about the boy who'd walked away from West Point to take care of his mother and sister. He'd thought he was sacrificing his dreams for theirs. What he'd actually done was discover that some dreams are worth more than others, and that the greatest achievements aren't always the ones you plan for yourself. 3 months later, I stood in my new office at Walter Reed Medical Center, looking out at the Potomac River and thinking about the journey that had brought me there. On my desk sat a framed photo from Emma's wedding, not the formal portrait, but a candid shot someone had taken during the toasts. Emma and I were laughing at something David had said, while General Harrison looked on with the satisfied expression of someone who'd witnessed justice being served. Next to the photo was a letter from Mom, written on stationery with her new married name, describing her honeymoon in Florida and her plans to return to college for a nursing degree. At 38, she'd decided it wasn't too late to pursue the career she'd dreamed of before Dad's problems derailed her life. The irony wasn't lost on me. The boy who'd given up his chance at becoming an officer to protect his family had ended up commissioned anyway, with a rank and position he could never have achieved through traditional paths. The sacrifices that had seemed like endings had actually been beginnings, leading to opportunities I'd never imagined. That evening, as I walked through Georgetown's tree-lined streets toward dinner with Emma and David, I passed a group of college students heading to bars and parties, laughing and carefree in the way only people without serious responsibilities can be. 8 years earlier, I'd envied that freedom, wondering what my life might have been like if I'd been able to follow the normal path of education and advancement. Now I understood something those students couldn't yet know, The most meaningful life isn't always the easiest one, and the choices that seem like sacrifices at the time often turn out to be investments in a future you couldn't have planned. The uniform that had made me a target for mockery at Emma's wedding hung in my closet at home, ribbons and insignia carefully maintained, ready for the next formal occasion. But it was no longer just a symbol of service. It was a reminder that sometimes the longest road to your destination turns out to be the most rewarding one to travel. And sometimes, when you're willing to risk everything for the people you love, you discover that everything you thought you were giving up was actually preparing you for something far better than what you'd originally dreamed. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.